But in exchange for that, they give the church resources, or they give his ministry or his apostleship resources. And so that's the central argument that he's going to develop over this chapter here. And so when he starts off with the questions, he's trying to say, I'm letting you know that I am your pastor. I have spiritual leadership, and that I have done some work. In other words, I want to get some money or something in return. But he said, see, it's proof that I've done some work. I have leadership. I have apostleship. I have a ministry going here. And then in verse 2, it says, if I be not an apostle unto others, yet doubtless I am to you. For the seal of mine apostleship are ye in the Lord. And so he's saying that those people who have been proselytized by him and brought to the Lord, and those people who have been built up in the Lord by him, that they're the seal of his ministry. They're the proof of his ministry. And in 3 it says, my answer to them that do examine me is this: have ye not power to eat and to drink? And then in 5, have we not power to lead about a sister or wife, as well as other apostles, and as the brethren of the Lord, and Cephas? And then Cephas was one of his ministers. But I know she stopped me from 1 through 5, but this is the beginning of the argument that he has as to why it is that the congregation, it wasn't the same congregation how we see now. These were all in families. He would go from house to house preaching the gospel. And these were first just families, whether we say mother, father, sister, brother, grandparents, all in one household, cousins, friends, or whatever. And then he would go to another household. And what he was beginning to see was that tent making which is what his profession was. It was as a minister in the Jewish faith from the beginning. It was also a tent maker. And this was not enough to make him be properly supported, where he can eat good and that sort of thing. And so he starts off this argument with trying to prove that the work that he is doing for them is a good work, that it's a faithful work. So I want to now kind of open up, because I know everybody done read the whole chapter, so I just kind of want to open up any portion of that to questions so that we can have an interaction.
So what you mean is, this part means like you have to pay the tithes for...
No, at that time, it wasn't no such thing. We developed through church tradition and other stuff this idea of tithes now. We've developed that, but at this time, Paul was just beginning to talk about the fact that we need to get some money from the congregants to keep the ministry going, to keep the stuff. See, they hadn't even come up with this idea of 10% and that. It wasn't. In the early church, they did actually more than the 10%. So, like if a family gave him a goat, that may have been a big percentage. That may have been 70% of their income, So what he was trying to do was develop in their minds the idea that it ought to be some support for the ministry. So he actually goes back into the Old Testament scriptures to give a preponderance of evidence to point to. And then he also, part of the evidence is he's saying, didn't I bring you to Christ? Am I serving you in a spiritual way? And so, in order for me to do this I can't be tent making and doing this too. So he's saying, in a sense, could y'all please help me support myself? And that's the central premise here that he's putting out. That he has to be able to has some money, but nowadays we would say has some money in his pocket. But he has to be able to feed himself, clothe himself, yes, and to be able to have money for traveling and other stuff. And so he's putting out this as a position that, in fact, can they give some of their carnal things or some of their living to him so that, in fact, he and the ministry can live. So this is the very, very beginning of the ministry. And nowadays we have a very elaborate system, at least in thought, of how we should support the ministry. But, that's just where they were then. It was very basic.
And actually, I was going to ask you, how did you take from the Church of Acts then to now, and even ministry, and how, we should support not just the pastor, but just the ministry itself? What benefit is that for those that are obedient to do just that?
And, in terms of Acts, I think that those Christians, they had their view, they gave everything to the church, but that was more communal. They were more communal as opposed to this group here. When Paul went out, he did a little different. But in Acts, they were saying, I'm giving everything that I make to the church. But then the ministers at that time had to take everybody's money, and then they would divide it amongst the family so that nobody would have any needs or wants. And that's how they were doing that. But here it's the same position, because they're trying to figure out how do we make it profitable so that the ministry can go on, that our ministers won't die of hunger and they won't, that all of their needs are also taken care of. And so Paul is trying to address that. And he's addressing it from the fact that there's really no Christian precedence. Now, today we have precedence, right? We have highly organized churches, the United Methodist Church, the Roman Catholic churches. We have a Greek Orthodox, the Egyptian Orthodox Church, the Ethiopian. We have a lot of examples of history and precedence. But with a young church today, as it was with Paul, it's the same thing. People have to grapple with, well, how do we support the ministry in such a way that we keep the ministry going? And the families have to think of this. How do I support the ministry, but I also got to support my own family? I got to support my kids, got to support my wife, or from the wife perspective, she has to support the husband. And you may have to send some money to some relatives in Texas, or some relatives in Nigeria, or some relatives in Ghana, or some relatives in South Africa. So you have to do a balancing act. And then at the same time, the ministry is saying, please, when you do the balancing act, can you consider your support of the ministry? And so it is, it's a tough decision that has to be made, but Paul is saying this decision has to be made in order for the ministry to go on, in order for the ministry to survive. But it's not a cookie cutter situation where, say everybody gonna do it how the church and say the book of Acts did it. It's the churches around the world, they have developed and survived on different ways of supporting ministry. So
now, because since we're talking about that, because you said back then they didn't really look at the 10% and the tithing and all that, but now that we're in that type of, we're in the 21st century, and with the tithing and everything, why is tithing important in the church? Could you kind of make the difference between the tithing and the offering, and then tying in this type of support that Paul is saying? Because a lot of times people feel that because they may, say for instance, clean a church or come and buy something for the church or anything like that, that's part of their tithes, that's part of their offering, that they don't have to be obedient to giving their 10% of the church. I mean, I understand it is not, but that is something that goes on, that sometimes we as people need an understanding on that, because we still supposed to get 10% of our earnings. And even, since we're talking about this, I just want to get an understanding as well. The 10% say for like income tax, because we work the whole year, but during the year we give our 10% off of our paycheck. But then when income tax come, isn't that part of our earning that we still have to get 10% off of that? So I was just wanting to know your view in that, since we're even talking about supporting the church and all that, because in our tithes, in our offerings, that also helps support the church, you know, for us the financing and keeping the church up and going and things of that sort.
Yeah, I can't speak for the church, but I can only talk about how it's looked at generally. And for most Christians, it's looked at, you know, we can kind of reduce it to how are they taught or how they study the Bible or how they look at things. Some people look at it as that, you know, I'm going to give God as much as I can give God. And then you can look at examples from the Old Testament where then 10% is the thing, you know. And so it's to me, it's based upon how they see things in terms of the percentage of their income. And then some people say, well, you 10% off the top, and then other people say 10% after taxes, you know. But I think it has to be, you know, how it is taught, and then how it is understood by the congregant. But it's also a big part of that is your family, you know, your money. You know, how much can you really give in terms of the actual, and this is how well you connected to that ministry too, because people will not give a tithe unless they truly connected to a particular ministry. And then you have an offering, which is the other concept you gave. You can give an offering at any time and for any amount. You know, you can give an offering for much more than your 10% less, or you can, you know, but that's your offering, and then that's your tithe. But most people, they tithe to their church, or their home church, family church, or they may tithe to something. You know, they may give to a community function or whatever. I don't know. It comes down to the family. But of course, any given church, they're going to want that tithe to go to the church themselves, you know. So, but, you know, every church kind of teaches it a little differently. But no matter how they teaches it, the individual families in the congregant, the individual Christians, they have to be able to accept that. And it has to be freely, they have to freely do it. Because, you know, you can't do like the IRS. If you don't pay the money to the IRS, they come and put you in jail, you see. They come and take your house from you and your car. And but they're forcing you to do it. But with the church, it's not a forced situation with most churches. Some churches, it's kind of a force. It's a condition of membership. And it's a condition of other things inside the church. Now, one of the churches that I pastored, tithing, I made it a condition of receiving help from the church. For instance, if I were to help had asked the church to help a person, it would be based upon how they were tithing. If they didn't tithe, and they say they needed their rent paid, the car paid, or they need a ticket somewhere to help somebody, right? Then it would be based upon how they was tithing, whether they were tithing or just giving an offering, or some people just put maybe $1.50 in the plate. And then you have some people who do an offering, something they thought about, and then you have others who stick to the 10%, but you got other people who may give 20 or 30% because they just love their church and they're really connected to their church and they want the church to grow and survive in that particular manner. So, it really comes down to how the church is being taught and how and what a choice the congregant takes to carry out their idea of financial support. But I think when they say 10%, and I base it upon my studies of the scripture, is that I don't believe it's talking about just money. I think it's 10% of everything of the individual. I believe that one's help count is 10%, one's participation in ministerial things, evangelism, all that. Some people say, well, I'll do a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and together it's 10%. I think that's just as good. But I think at the very core of it is one's participation. Because you participating because God has so moved you in your church that you want your church to grow. And you want your church to be full of all of the gifts and the exercising of those gifts that God has. In other words, you're giving gifts because God is giving you rewards and gifts through the church itself. And but I do believe it comes down to the congregants. You know, it's what's the teaching out in the congregants.
So do you think just in these scriptures that you just touched on, 1 Corinthians chapter 9, 1 through 5, so Paul, do you feel so that when Paul was telling them about his apostleship, that some of them was questioning his apostleship, so he began to explain, you know, his apostleship to them, and also actually took them back even through his experience to the road of Damascus, where God brought him through what God brought him through and sealed him with apostleships, because he wasn't called in by the other apostles, correct? Mm-hmm. That God did it, but because he was not walking with the other apostles, do you believe that is the reason why some of them doubted his apostleship?
Yeah, I think it's one. How many of y'all, let me see a show of hands, believe that Paul should have been doubted?
About what?
Yeah, about his apostleship.
Oh.
About him being in Christ. Do you think that the people should have doubted him?
Well, I would say because of judgment, because of his past.
Because of his past. I would raise my hand and say that, yeah, because Paul used to kill Christians.
Yes.
Ooh, you know, it's like now you're a pastor, right?
Yes.
But before you came a pastor, you used to kill Christians. Like, okay, I'm a Christian today.
Right.
And but I'm looking at this pastor, and I'm thinking to this, at some point he might take out a gun and start shooting. Oh yeah. Oh yeah, for sure. I think today, the whole entire time, you can see throughout all of his writings, and Paul wrote most of the New Testament, that they doubted him. And they were afraid of him. And I think rightly so. If you had somebody for the majority of the time of their life had been killing Christians and you became a Christian, it would be foolish that you not keep one eye open on them, you know.
Yes.
But God so increased Paul's gifts and stuff like that come toward the end of his life, most of the Gentile Christians, they believed in Paul more because they were not aware of how he used to kill the Christians and that sort of thing. They wasn't aware of his past. And we all know that our past sometimes can come back to haunt us.
Can you work at the same time and do a pastor?
Say again, ma'am.
Could you
Can
work?
you work and so do the pastor job?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's difficult, but you know, in a lot of cases, you have to do it. Now, I can tell you about my experience. There was a couple of churches that I pastored. They had no money.
Okay.
See, I have 13 kids, even though most of them is adults now. But in some of the smaller churches that I pastored, the monies that they paid, you know, there's no way. You know, without a six-figure salary, there's no way in the world for me. That was a personal thing for me. So, but the congregants couldn't pay that money. That part of Washington D.C. that I pastored in, they had not the money. So I wasn't going to. What can you do if the folks was poor? You know, what can you do? But do you stop the gospel? I mean, for them, you stop ministry? No, you do the best you can. You go out, and do you know Paul went back to tent making too? The disciples went back. Most of them was fishermen and tax collectors. They went back doing their work after Jesus was crucified.
I would like to add to that, if I can,
Yeah.
please. And also, we should look at pastoring also in a way, because a lot of times we focus on pastoring just like in a building, in a building. But God, He also allowed those to pastor those outside the building, you know. So therefore, you know, you could be pastoring every day, not even, you know, looking not inside the building, but outside the building. And I would also say that yes, it takes money, it takes finances to do God's work, but at the same time, your obedience and your faithfulness and your word, as you begin to teach the people so that they have an understanding on the things, like what Pastor Ed said, it's very important that the people understand, you know, tithing. You know, as leaders, you know, as a pastor, that's our job. We must teach the people, because see, in tithing and offering all those things and blessing the church, there's a blessing unto you. So therefore, us not teaching those things also, it takes us out of being obedient to what God tells us to do. You know, in other words, also, and I'm saying that in everything, I believe that, yes, you can work in pastor. It depends on the job also. Because it's hard to really pastor when you have to clock in. You know, a job where, you know, you got a supervisor, you have a manager. But like if you're like self-employed, or if you're like, you know, I can speak for myself, you know, where you have flexibility to go in and out. Because even in your work, that's ministry, marketplace ministry. But I believe also through prayer, through your obedience, through your humility, that God can touch somebody to just pay the whole bill for the church that month. I'm just saying. But at the same time, you still have to use logic, because at the end of the day, it is about making sure you have the finances to run the church. So you still have to use that wisdom in that area, but also your faith in God also brings revenue to help keep the church going as well. But it depends on, like Pastor Ed said, the church size, the you know, but as you grow, I believe God can send one person, I'm just saying, that has the heart to say, you know what, I'm going to take care of all the finances. And then that you may have to work, and you can do the work that you like to do, you know, and still pastor. So it all, I believe, plays a part in your obedience, your faithfulness, and your sacrifice. Because a lot of times when you sow yourself, those seeds come back to you. You know, so I just wanted to, because, you know, just for myself, you know, in ministry, that's one of the things that I struggle with, like, okay, not having like the finances really to do evangelism, like do really what I wanted to do. But I just remember one day I just did it. You know, God told me to go downtown, go make some chili, put the whole pot in my car and go to Washington Park on the corner of 12th and L and just serve chili and serve water to the people. And as I did that, as I was doing that for 2 days straight, somebody came to me from City Gospel and said, hey, we have a kitchen 2 blocks down. You're more than welcome to come there and serve, but you have to pay for all the food and everything once a month. I had no way of knowing how I would do that. I had to feed over 180 people. It would take $200 to buy all the food for that. But I tell you, every month, God made a way. God provided the food, He provided the finances, and He opened up the door to where I didn't have to be outside in the cold serving, but He allowed me to have a kitchen, and also He brought help. People that could cook, people that can sow. And so I'm just saying, with your faithfulness, your obedience, God will open up a door.
Amen. But what's important, particularly in the United States, is money. And so when we, bring it up to today how it is, making money is important to the ministry. And I just think that there's a lot of churches which have done creative things, like own the apartment buildings, and taking the rents and using the rents to come into the church on a monthly basis to lower the bills or to eliminate the bills, and because you have pastors' salary, pastors' living, you have the secretary money, you have the maintenance staff, then you have the other ministers on staff. And if you want to have that type of staff and stuff like that, then you have to have another means. One of the churches, they tried to hang me. I was pastoring a United Methodist church, and our tithing had went down to really, really low. I think that church was running on something like $230,000 a year, but I think we was only collecting like $150, right? So we had some money that we had saved up for a building fund. So I took the